This police K9 dog saved his handler but at a devastating cost. Rookie Officer Michael and his loyal K9 partner, Titan, are thrust into a high-stakes drug bust that quickly spirals into chaos. When the raid goes wrong, Titan's unflinching courage saves Michael's life, but at very high price. Michael's chest tightened, but his hands remained steady on Titan's leash. He watched the K9's sharp eyes scan the streets ahead. The air was thick, pressing down like a heavy weight. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his mind remained clear. Titan, a German shepherd with fur the color of midnight, stood by his side perfectly still, alert, his every muscle honed and ready. The smell of pavement and exhaust hung in the air, mixing with the faint trace of burned coffee drifting from a nearby shop. "This is it, Titan," Michael whispered, his voice low, almost reverent. Titan's ears flicked, then went still again. He was all business now, but Michael could sense the bond between them, an unspoken trust, formed in training, cemented in the field. The plan was simple, or so it seemed. Michael's first real operation as a rookie K9 handler. The target, a dealer called Viper, notorious for hiding his drugs in unsuspecting homes. The Viper's network stretched far and wide, but Titan had proven himself more than capable of sniffing out his stash. Michael glanced at the team gathered behind them, veteran officers, poised and focused, ready for action. Everyone had their roles. Titan had his nose, and Michael had a chance to prove himself. He was determined to do just that. They'd been watching the Viper for weeks now, tracking movements, patterns. Titan's nose never failed. The K9 would lead them right to the house, the safe house where the drugs were hidden. "Ready." Sergeant Alvarez's voice broke through the silence, cutting through the tension. Michael nodded, his pulse quickening despite the calm exterior. He could feel the weight of the operation, but Titan stood like a silent sentinel beside him, unwavering. "All right, Titan," Michael muttered, patting the dog's side. "Show me what you've got." The dog's nose twitched, then dropped low to the ground. His pace slowed, every step deliberate. The scent was there. Michael could feel the change in the air, the shift in Titan's posture. He was on the trail. Titan led them past rows of homes, down narrow alleyways, through hidden corners of the neighborhood. The world felt smaller, more concentrated, as they followed Titan's instinct. They paused outside a house at the end of a dead-end street. The house looked unremarkable, ordinary even. But Michael could feel something else lurking beneath its surface, a quiet tension in the air. Titan stopped, sitting in front of the door, his gaze fixed, unwavering. "He's on it," Michael said, nodding to Alvarez. Without another word, the team began moving, gathering around as Titan continued to signal ahead. His alert was subtle but undeniable. The air around them seemed to vibrate with a low hum as the officers assembled their gear. "Let's move in," Alvarez barked. Michael's breath caught. This was it. This was the moment. Titan, steady and confident, remained at Michael's side, a silent partner ready for whatever came next. They stormed the house swift, efficient. Michael's hand tightened around the leash, guiding Titan through the front door. The house was eerily quiet at first, almost too still. Michael's boots made muted thumps against the floor, and Titan's nails scraped lightly as they moved further inside. The scent of stale air mixed with the tang of something metallic. Sweat prickled on the back of Michael's neck. Then it happened. A door slammed open to the right. Gunshots erupted, the deafening roar shattering the calm. The noise seemed to come from all directions, ricocheting off the walls, vibrating in Michael's chest. Titan barked, lunging forward, his body low to the ground. "Down," Alvarez shouted, but it was too late. The dealer's crew had reacted faster than they anticipated. Bullets flew slicing the air with dangerous intent. Michael's instincts kicked in. Titan bolted ahead, his body moving with the grace and speed of a predator. Then, a sharp cry pierced the chaos. Titan yelled. The sound was guttural, full of pain. Michael's heart stuttered, his feet frozen for a split second. Titan had been hit. "Titan," Michael shouted, his voice raw with panic. Titan stumbled but pushed forward, his body driven by instinct, by years of training. The dog's leg gave out slightly, but he recovered, continuing the charge despite the blood staining his fur. He was still there, still fighting. The room was a blur of movement, officers scrambling, guns firing, chaos taking hold. Michael ducked behind a doorframe, his back pressed against the cold, rough wood. His hands shook as he glanced at Titan, who was now limping, the pain evident but not enough to stop him. "Stay with me," Michael whispered under his breath as Titan limped toward him. A bullet whizzed past Michael's face, close enough to feel the rush of wind against his skin. He instinctively pulled Titan closer, dragging the dog away from the line of fire. His heart raced, not from the fear for himself, but for Titan. "Stay down, boy, stay down," Michael muttered as he crouched low, pulling Titan behind cover. The K9's breathing was shallow, but he remained alert, his focus never wavering. He was ready to protect. The gunfire had died down, but the tension didn't. Michael knew they couldn't stay there much longer. He was caught between two decisions: protect Titan and retreat, or push forward with the operation. His hands clenched around the leash, his mind spinning. "Move, now," Alvarez's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. But Michael couldn't move, not without Titan. He grabbed the dog's collar with trembling hands, guiding him out of the line of fire, moving backward with slow, measured steps. Titan's gaze never left the chaos behind them, his body still tense, ready for anything. They backed out of the house together, inching toward the exit, where the rest of the team had begun regrouping. Michael's heart pounded, but his breath was steady now. They'd made it, barely. As they retreated, Michael looked down at Titan, whose muzzle was streaked with dirt and blood. The K9's eyes met his, calm and determined. They were alive. That's all that mattered, but something was wrong. This wasn't just a botched raid. Michael could feel it in his bones. The dealer's crew had been too prepared, too well armed. There was something larger at play, something they hadn't accounted for. The harsh taste of gunpowder still hung in the air, mingling with the smell of sweat and blood. The sound of distant sirens no longer seemed urgent, just a background hum to the tension gripping the street. The world seemed to hold its breath as Michael, with Titan by his side, moved away from the scene, back into the shadows of the city. He didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were beginning to fit together in ways that felt wrong. Too wrong. Michael couldn't shake the image of the faces in the pictures. The Viper's crew, yes, but also others. Bigger players hidden in the murk of the city's underworld. The brief glimpses of those faces had burned themselves into his memory, taunting him with the thought that he had stumbled into something much bigger than just one drug dealer. Titan had been hit. A simple grazing shot, nothing life-threatening, but enough to slow them down. Michael knew better than to push the dog too hard, not while Titan was recovering. But still, something gnawed at him. The raid had been too chaotic, too well coordinated. The drug house, the weapons, the crew. All of it pointed to something much more than street-level dealing. They spent the next few days piecing together what little they had. Titan's nose led them from one house to another, each one more significant than the last. At first, it seemed like just another bust, another closed door, another hidden stash. But as they dug deeper, Michael started to see the connections. Each raid felt more like a chapter in a story he wasn't prepared to read. The houses weren't just safe houses for drugs anymore. They were something more, a staging ground for a much larger operation. Michael's mind raced as he scanned over the maps spread across the table. He could feel Titan beside him, even without looking. The dog's patience was a constant, a silent reminder of their partnership, their bond that had only grown stronger since the raid. Titan had never failed him, and Michael refused to fail him now. There was a pattern. Michael didn't know exactly what it meant, but he could see the way the houses were situated. They weren't just used for selling. They were connections points in a much larger network, extending far beyond just the Viper. Each of the homes had links to powerful figures, people who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement. The more Michael uncovered, the more he realized that they were no longer just hunting drug dealers. They were staring down a massive web of corruption, with tendrils that reached into the city's heart. With every discovery, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. A hidden warehouse here, a suburban house there, each location building on the last. And Titan's nose was relentless, driving them forward, unearthing more and more as the days passed. But with every lead they followed, the danger grew. Michael's superiors were starting to question him. They didn't like what he was uncovering. They didn't like how deep he was digging. "You're just a rookie," Alvarez had warned him one night, his voice low and serious. "Know your limits. The Viper is dangerous, but there's something bigger here, and you need to step back before you get too deep." Michael hadn't agreed. Not yet. Titan stayed by his side, as calm as ever. There was no fear in the dog's eyes, only focus. Titan had no choice but to follow his handler's lead, just as Michael had no choice but to trust the dog. As the investigation progressed, Michael grew more certain of one thing. They weren't just after a street-level drug dealer anymore. They had uncovered something that would change the city forever. The Viper was just the tip of the iceberg, a pawn in a far more dangerous game. The city began to feel different, thicker somehow, like the air had changed, heavy with secrets. And those secrets were starting to catch up with them. Titan's alerts grew more urgent, more focused. They were getting closer to the heart of the operation. But it wasn't just the drug dealers who were watching. They were aware of Michael and Titan's progress, and they were starting to respond. The tension in the air shifted, becoming sharper, more dangerous. People were taking notice of the rookie handler and his canine partner, and they didn't like what they were uncovering. The Viper's crew had grown more aggressive. The encounters became more frequent, more violent. One night, Michael and Titan barely escaped with their lives after a close call with a group of armed men. The threats were becoming harder to ignore, but Michael's resolve only hardened. Titan's loyalty was unshaken. The dog was focused, his every move calculated, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Michael had always relied on Titan's instincts, but now he needed to trust his own. Training with Titan became more intense. Every day, they worked together, pushing their limits. The stakes were rising, and Michael knew they needed to be ready. The bond between them deepened, an unspoken promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The breakthrough came one late evening when Titan led them to a mansion on the outskirts of the city, an imposing structure behind high gates, surrounded by dense trees. Michael stood at the edge of the property, his eyes scanning the area, Titan by his side. "This is it," he muttered, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. This was the heart of the operation, the place where the Viper and other major players were hiding, protected by layers of security. The mansion was fortified, almost impenetrable. Michael's fingers traced the outline of his gun, the weight of it oddly comforting. But he knew this wasn't going to be an easy raid. They were walking into a lion's den. The mansion sprawled before him, its dark silhouette outlined against the twilight sky. The gates were high, guarded by thick iron bars that gleamed menacingly under the dim light. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and creeping ivy, mixed with the faint smell of gasoline from a nearby generator. Silence hung in the air, thick and unsettling. Titan was already moving, his head low to the ground, eyes trained on the mansion ahead. His paws made no sound against the gravel, but Michael could feel the tension building in the dog's every movement. The bond between them had deepened through their journey, and now, as they stood on the precipice of their greatest challenge, it felt like the air itself held its breath. Michael adjusted his grip on Titan's leash, feeling the slight tremor in his hands. He glanced down at the dog, whose ears were flat against his head, every muscle in his body taut with readiness. Titan had never faltered before. Michael hoped, more than anything, that this wouldn't be the moment that tested their bond to its breaking point. "This is it," Michael said again, almost in a whisper. The words felt too small for the magnitude of the moment. It wasn't just about bringing down the Viper. It was about dismantling a network that had spread its fingers deep into the city's core. They moved forward, silent as shadows, through the thick darkness that enveloped them. The soft crunch of their footsteps seemed too loud, each one echoing in the stillness, yet it went unnoticed by the guards, hidden somewhere beyond the ornate stone columns flanking the entrance. Titan led the way, confident, his nose twitching as he picked up the faintest traces of human scent. The front doors stood imposing, their ironwork intricately designed but darkened with age and wear. Michael's breath was shallow, the cold metal of his gun pressing against his side. The weight of it felt heavier now, as though it were a part of the burden he carried. The dog's tail was stiff, his movements calculated. Michael's pulse quickened. Without warning, everything shattered. The sound of gunfire echoed through the air, sharp and unforgiving. Michael didn't have time to react. Bullets whizzed past, ricocheting off stone and wood. Titan barked, a ferocious sound that seemed to reverberate in the night, and charged forward. Michael barely had time to raise his gun before the chaos enveloped him. The sharp scent of gunpowder filled the air, heavy and acrid. The thunderous cracks of gunfire were nearly drowned out by the pounding of his own heartbeat, but Michael didn't flinch. He knew the mission now: survival. They needed to stay alive long enough to bring down this empire. Titan moved like a shadow, fast and fluid, dodging gunfire with ease, his body an instinctive blur of speed. Michael's gun roared in his hand, the sharp kickback making his arm tremble with each shot. The figures in the distance, masked and cloaked in darkness, scattered as they took cover, returning fire in rapid succession. Michael's eyes flicked to Titan, whose body barely missed a bullet that tore through the air beside him. The dog's instincts were perfect, his agility saving them both more times than Michael could count, but there were too many of them, too many armed figures emerging from the dark corners of the mansion. They were surrounded, pressed into a corner by sheer numbers. Suddenly, Michael found himself caught. A figure appeared before him, masked, his gun raised to Michael's chest. The barrel of the gun gleamed cold in the dim light, pointing directly at his heart. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the shooter took aim. This was it, but Titan wasn't about to let it end like that. In a burst of strength, the K9 lunged forward, a blur of muscle and fury, and knocked the shooter off balance. The gunshot went wide, missing Michael by inches. But as Titan collided with the man, the shooter's gun fired again, this time, striking Titan. The world seemed to slow, the sharp crack of the bullet deafening as it pierced through Titan's side. The dog yelped, the sound ragged with pain, but he didn't falter. Titan's body collapsed on top of the shooter, but the damage was done. "Titan!" Michael shouted, dropping to his knees. The gunfire around him continued, but his world had narrowed down to just the dog, the blood staining the fur beneath his paws. Titan's breathing was shallow now, labored. His head rested against Michael's leg, but his eyes never left the chaos unfolding around them. Michael's hands were slick with sweat and blood as he tried to apply pressure to the wound. But there was no time. Titan's body, once so full of energy and life, was growing still. "Stay with me, buddy," Michael muttered, tears blurring his vision, but the words felt useless. He could feel Titan slipping away, his life draining out of him with each passing second. Michael glanced around, the sound of his rapid breaths mingling with the gunfire, the shouting from his team trying to push forward. A choice was before him now. Titan was slipping, there was no saving him here. The mansion was still crawling with enemies, and the mission was far from over. Titan's eyes met his, and in that fleeting moment there was no fear, only loyalty, only trust. Without another word, Michael made his decision. He grabbed Titan's collar, pulling him back from the line of fire. "We're getting out of here, buddy," Michael whispered hoarsely. Despite the agony, Titan moved, one painful step after another. Michael kept close, every step of their retreat a struggle. The dog's body was battered, but he was still alive, still fighting. They reached the back door of the mansion, Titan's strength draining with each agonizing step. His movements were slower now, his body slumping under the weight of his injuries. Michael could hear the sound of boots pounding behind them, more enemies closing in. They were running out of time. With shaking hands, Michael grabbed his radio, calling for backup. The signal crackled in his ear, the response faint but promising. Help was on the way, but would it come in time? He glanced down at Titan, whose weight leaned heavily against him, but even now, the dog's determination was clear. Titan had never given up, and he wasn't about to start. In one final act of defiance, Titan surged forward, his paws pounding against the ground, his body propelled by sheer will. His leap gave Michael the seconds they needed to slip through the back door and out into the relative safety of the night. But those seconds came at a cost. As Titan darted forward, the crack of a bullet split the air. Michael's breath caught as Titan collapsed, his body folding in on itself as the bullet found its mark. Michael's heart shattered. He pulled Titan back to him, his hands trembling as he checked for signs of life. But the dog's breathing was shallow, labored, and there was no strength in his movements anymore. Titan's body, once full of power and energy, was now limp in Michael's arms. "We're almost there, Titan," Michael whispered desperately, cradling the dog's head against his chest. "Don't leave me." "You're not leaving me." But Titan's eyes, those sharp, loyal eyes, slowly closed. The dog's head slumped, the fight leaving his body. His last breath was weak but steady, his body still warm against Michael's trembling hands. "Stay with me," Michael said, but the words felt hollow. Titan had already given everything. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, but it was too late. The battle had already taken its toll. Michael, his body numb with grief, carried Titan away from the mansion, the dog's weight growing heavier with every step. By the time the authorities arrived, the mansion had been cleared, the Viper was arrested, and the entire drug network had been dismantled. But none of it felt like a victory, not without Titan by his side. The loss was too great, too raw. Next evening Michael stood over the grave of Shadow. He choked on the lump in his throat, wiping away the tears that fell freely. "I won't let you down, Shadow," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave everything for me, and I'll never forget that. I'll carry your spirit with me, always." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the grave, Michael stood tall, his heart aching with the weight of his loss. But he knew what he had to do. Titan had saved his life, had given everything, and now it was Michael's turn to honor that sacrifice, to continue the fight for justice.